We are Rogue Media Sports.
A lot can happen between falling in love with a house online and owning it. Between imagining living there and breathing in your new home for the first time. Having an advocate who can help you navigate the complex world of financing, inspections, negotiating, analyzing the market, and talking through any anxieties that may pop up, that can make all the difference. That's what the expertise of a Realtor can do for you. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors and bound by a code of ethics, because that's who we are.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.
And it is Matt Mosley live from the Frito Nation Productions in Allen, Texas. And we've got Ed Werder joining us from a hotel in the Tampa area, and he's getting ready to do some Monday Night Football for Westwood One. And Ed, I know you watched every moment of that Cowboys disgrace. And we, of course, are just a little bit removed from that game now, about an hour after it has been completed. But I would have to say, Ed, the final indignity for the Cowboys was watching the guy that we've talked all offseason about, and would they or would they not trade for Earl Thomas? Wasn't it poetic justice that this team fell today, and then Earl Thomas ends up with 2 interceptions and ends it with the bow toward the Cowboys sideline? He takes a bow. Ed, is that I think we're back to feeling a lot like, and I know Cowboys fans are feeling this way, like they felt after that first that opening loss to Carolina.
Well, yeah, and Earl Thomas obviously in Seattle, sort of against his will and better judgment. And obviously he blames the Cowboys for not getting him out of a situation that he doesn't consider fair or favorable by trading for him and extending his contract. And he said basically he bowed because they had their chance to come and get him and extend him, and they didn't get it done. And so that's why he did that toward their bench. But yeah, I mean, and you know what, worse, if you look at this analytically and evaluate the performance of the passing game and look at the quarterback's play with Dak Prescott, we're going to go way back. We're not going to just go back to week 1 of this season. This performance takes you all the way back to 2003, and I'll explain that when the time comes.
Oh, man, and the time will arrive very soon. Ed, we may get you to check into a hotel every week. You just sound wonderful like this. And I have the green screen here in the studio all to myself. You know, I kind of like these solo shots. But, Ed, you sound fabulous. You have a lot of information to share. We both do, and we will both talk about a crushing Cowboys loss as they fall to 1-2, and Jerry Jones decides this is the team they were playing that was desperate. I don't know why in the world the Cowboys wouldn't play like a desperate team, but they certainly didn't. Frito, if you would please play the music, sir. And here it is, another Cowboys loss, and they dropped this one at 24-13. It really never felt like. I know Troy and Joe kept saying, "Oh, the Cowboys could get back in this thing." Boy, it never felt like they were even close to getting back in this. And Ed, we were right back to where we started at the beginning of the season. We thought we saw maybe against the Giants, who, by the way, went out and won a game today, and now they improved to 1-2. We thought the Cowboys might have shown us a path to how, if there were any chance of them winning this season, they would do it against the Giants last week. And I think it's, as you look at the stats and you look at all the numbers, I know you've got a lot in front of you right now to share, but we basically saw nothing from Dak that even resembled, this path we talked about where he was going to be physical quarterback and put the hurt on the defense and maybe some zone read. We didn't see it until the game had basically already been decided, and it was in the fourth quarter. And this got back to looking a lot like that Cowboys offense we saw the opening week.
Well, I think one of the things that we like to do for our listeners is to put everything into the proper context and apply all the perspective that we have gained through all the years of covering this team. And, the Cowboys have scored 41 points in 3 games. That's twice as many as the Cardinals, but fewer than every other team in the league. And you have to wonder if the quarterback's passing statistics might at least privately have the Cowboys wavering in their conviction about Dak Prescott as their franchise quarterback. You look at it dating back to last season, Prescott has now thrown for fewer than 200 yards in 5 straight games, the longest such streak by a Cowboys quarterback since Quincy Carter in 2003. That's the number I referenced earlier.
As a playoff team.
5 games,
that was a playoff team, sir.
Yeah, well, Quincy was one of the most remarkable. I think he's going in the Ring of Honor any moment. And in those 5 games, he's averaging 5.6 yards per pass attempt with 3 touchdowns and 4 picks. So what can the general manager, what can Jerry Jones do to change that? Fire Scott Linehan as offensive coordinator? Fire Jason Garrett as a head coach? Bench Dak? Maybe he should. Maybe he will do some of those things. But I don't know how it really makes a difference at this point. The mistake to me seems to have been that the personnel decisions made it wide receiver and tight end after they released Des Bryant and lost Jason Witten to retirement. They have no playmakers at those positions, and so they got humiliated by the Seahawks and a defensive superstar that, as we said, they've been trying to acquire for some time in Earl Thomas. And really the only offensive player that they have who's feared by defense is Ezekiel Elliott, who made 2 dumb plays himself, had his best rushing game of the year, but negated a 31-yard touchdown reception with a penalty for being out of bounds as he lost sense of where he was on the field, and then breaks his longest run of the year and loses the ball at the end of it because he carried it away from his body and fumbled. And to your point about the coaching, last week in their only victory so far, Dak had a career-high 45 yards rushing, using that quarterback option, being a physical presence in the game against the Giants. No attempts against Seattle until they were down 24-6 in the fourth quarter. So my question really is, what is it that the Cowboys went into that game thinking they were going to do to score? I mean, there were no deep throws, nothing down the field, no run after catch. And it's worth noting that the other quarterback, Russell Wilson, also failed to throw for 200 yards, but we've seen him do it. He's been to 2 Super Bowls, and you don't have to throw for 200 yards to win, but you have to make plays in the passing game, and Wilson did that often enough with 2 touchdown throws, and Dak had absolutely nothing working for him all day.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing that this team, and Ed, you've covered Seattle over the years quite a bit, and you know that Richard Sherman was somebody you knew really well. This is a team that suddenly the Cowboys are able to sort of encourage other teams. And when you think, all is lost, they thought maybe getting home, maybe having Cam Chancellor be the 12th man today, maybe that would inspire them. Suddenly, an offensive line that had looked horrific gives them a tiny bit of hope. And as you said, Russell Wilson, I mean, he's been running for his life. Every game so far had been 6 sacks in the previous 2 games apiece and had been running for his life. Well, they found a way to get things done, and they've got a new offense coordinator in Schottenheimer. They're trying to get things right. That is a total rebuild that they're doing, and the Cowboys really, Ed, didn't even stay on the field with him. And, I mean, that's pretty it's pretty humiliating, to borrow a word I think you brought up already.
Well, you have to keep in mind, there used to be no shame going to Seattle and losing, but this is not the Seattle Super Bowl dynasty. As you said, it's a team more in a rebuilding mode. In fact, Earl Thomas and Bobby Wagner, the linebacker, are the only 2 defensive starters on the field today who were on their last Super Bowl team. And, so this is not the Legion of Boom, it's the Legion of Whom. And winning in Seattle is something that 4 teams did last year. Seattle was 4-4 at home last year. So it's not the place that's impossible to win, like it was during their Super Bowl dynasty when they went like 34-6 at home. This is not that scenario at all. And the Cowboys just didn't ever really seem to me to be in a competitive frame of mind in the game. And, Jerry Jones said afterward that he's frustrated like everybody else that they didn't play well enough to win. But here's his most telling quote to me. As far as looking at this as something that is what this team is going to be, I'm talking execution-wise, I'm talking one-loss-wise, I don't see that at all. So Jerry not ready in week 3 to give up on the season, which comes as no surprise, obviously. But I just don't understand how they go into this game. They're in their third year with Dak Prescott as their starting quarterback. They've had 2 off seasons, to acquire talent and create an offensive system that maximizes his abilities. They know his strengths and weaknesses, and yet they seem utterly baffled about how to create an opportunity for him to win.
Yeah, it is. It is completely baffling, and I think you're right. I think there are things that are happening right now to cause, you and I will get on the phone and talk to people throughout the organization. But you have to. You would be lying right now, and you and I have been too. I would think you could label us Dak apologists. I have very early on was on with the Dak bandwagon and thought it was brilliant. They found him in the 4th round, and I do think from an intangible standpoint, he is an incredible leader. But you're right; there are certain things he can do really well. He can keep plays alive. He can, he's a punishing runner at times. He can make, but like today, he was basically trying to run, and he couldn't really even get outside the pocket to make plays. It was embarrassing. And here's another thing that you do. When we talk about some of these great young quarterbacks, Ed, let's look around the league. Mahomes now 13. This is his 2nd year in the league. Okay, so this is Dak's third year. First full year as a starter. 13 touchdowns. He added 3 more today. This is kind of a down week for him. And they went ahead and rolled. And you saw Baker Mayfield come off the bench and inspire the city of Cleveland. I mean, this is the picture of just quarterback infamy. And you see someone in Dak. Here's what they thought. Okay, let's somehow go back to what we did 2 years ago. We have this good offensive line, and they did not bring him. In fact, they released Dez, and I'm not saying Dez was any great shakes at this point. Witten retires, and they literally have given him nothing. They brought in Bryce Butler. He was not active today. He has joined the team to maybe provide a deep threat. But, Ed, if you were watching that game today, I mean, you saw it. How would anybody have a chance to even get open? There's nobody, even when they got even close to the red zone, he backs up there and is hit before he has a chance to really do anything. So he's certainly not that accurate even when he has time. And then you could make the argument because he has such a lack of time, he gets gun shy in those moments when there is protection. And right now, it's a combination of no blocking, no accuracy, and nothing happening downfield. Other than Tavon Austin on that deep ball against the Giants, what have we seen them try to accomplish at all downfield? I mean,
I haven't. I think everybody would concede that the NFL and with some of the outrageous decisions we see officials making in terms of protecting the quarterback, more than ever, it's a quarterback-driven game. It's a passing game, and even if you don't have great matchups at the wide receiver position, there are ways to scheme people open. And I don't see the Cowboys doing some of the things and using some of the tactics that other teams use very commonly. With rub routes and flooding different zones and sides of the field. And I mean, I don't even know how often they really send a receiver in motion anymore. All I know is that if Tony Romo and Troy Aikman didn't live in Dallas and aren't the football experts in the broadcast booth that they are, Des Bryant would seem the smartest guy in all of Dallas as far as football goes.
Well, I when you talk about, by the way, the play calling, and we sat down with this offensive coordinator, and he talked to us about, hey, we're going to do some things scheme-wise we haven't been able to do in the past. We've got some versatility. We're going to move some people around. I know what they'll say. I don't even have to hear Garrett to know he'll say, we got behind the sticks. We weren't able to get into some things. Can I just throw a theory out to you, Ed? And I don't know if this is going to help anything for the Cowboys. I don't know. In fact, this probably will give Cowboys fans even less hope. But can I tell you what I think is being set up right now? There is a coach that has moved up to the press box, and Scott Linehan is calling plays from up there. Nothing has gotten better. In fact, you could argue it's gotten absolutely worse since last year. They're not going to fire Jason. Let's say this thing gets way out of control, like it did with Wade. And they fired Wade when they were like 1-7. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Ed, but it was something around that. They had fallen.
But even then, it wasn't so much the record as it was the performance on the field and the appearance that players had actually quit even trying anymore.
But here's where I'm going with this. I think we're about 3 games away, or maybe 2 games away, if there continues to be offensive futility, that this head coach is going to take over play calling duties. Now, do I think that's going to just completely change this thing and turn it on a dime? Probably not. But it's Garrett's best hope of trying to remind Jerry why he hired him in the first place. And hey, I am an offensive mind. You stripped me of this a few years ago. I'm just trying to think of the only things that you could do as a coaching staff. And so I'm not going to be shocked if Garrett tries to take this thing over in the coming weeks.
Well, and it's economically practical. It's not going to cost Jerry any money to do that. And yeah, I mean, that is a potential solution. And we have seen, as I mentioned last week, we have seen Jason Garrett when he's in survival mode, and he's probably approaching that point again now with the fact that they've scored, 13 points a game, 14 points a game for 3 weeks in a row. And yeah, he is going to want to protect himself from being fired at the end of the season. He's going to want to gain as much control over his own fate as possible. And what he has done in the past is he's related that to his ability to call the plays. Now, we've already talked about what a relationship he and Linehan have had for over the years. That when it came right down to it, he implored Jerry to let him hire Linehan because he trusted Linehan. They come from the same system. But obviously now it's reached the point where Jason wants to call the plays. He's been a play caller. It's ironic if Jerry allows it, or maybe Jerry would even initiate it out of desperation at this point. But basically, Jerry already concluded he doesn't want that kind. He doesn't think Jason's that kind of coach that he can succeed with those responsibilities, and he doesn't want him to do it. But yeah, I could certainly see that happening in the not too distant future. And you saying 3 weeks might be unusually patient for that in terms of Jerry's willingness to let it go.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if that comes to it. Now, I want us to weigh in on something Jerry had to say, and then I want to get to something you alluded to, Ed, and that's this the continuing. We've seen it now with the Packers linebacker. We saw it today early in this game on a call against Tyrone Crawford. We'll get to that in a second. Here's one thing that's annoying me about Jerry, and I've heard this for years. Jerry likes to say after losses that we knew this was going to be a dogfight. We knew this was going to be, and in tonight. Boy, he went exactly there. I'm listening to him after the game, and Jerry says something along the lines of, this team was 0-2. We knew at home they were going to be desperate. It's a way of Jerry trying to couch this as, we knew this game was going to be virtually impossible to win. It doesn't help anything. It certainly doesn't help fans, but in some ways,
so you'd rather go to Seattle when they're 2-0 and play them than when they're 0-2.
Very much so. That is what he's trying to do, and what he's trying to do also is mitigate the feelings of the loss to everybody. And basically saying, listen, this was a team that had its back completely against the wall, so we really knew we were going to have all sorts of trouble. But still, he has to admit, and at some point he has to own up to the fact that this offense is just simply not working. And Ed, we tried to see the best of things last week. I mean, let's not act like this thing turned into a juggernaut against the Giants. What they were able to do is run Dak 7 or 8 times, and he was able to be physical and kind of bruise up the Giants' defense to a certain extent. It's not like Zeke erupted in that game last week. So now what you have is, same thing against Carolina, you have Zeke occasionally showing flashes in these games of who he was in his rookie season. He certainly still has the burst, but you're not seeing it enough for it to be anything sustainable. And then, Ed, as you mentioned, then on a play that Dak makes with his legs, where he gets outside the pocket, keeps a play alive, and then tosses it to, I mean, that is a good play. That is something not every quarterback can do. That's a play Eli Manning cannot get outside the pocket and go make. That's a play maybe Alex Smith can't do. But he makes it, and then your running back, and he did it again later in the game, was out of bounds. He caught the ball out of bounds. I mean, the lack of awareness in what is supposed to be your most dangerous player is just maddening. And how do you game plan week to week around a guy that you can't count on?
Well, and again, early in the game, when they wanted to run the ball, they still couldn't. And to me, they kind of had the same approach that they had in the Carolina game. And now this time, maybe I understand why you think you're going to be able to run the ball against Seattle because other opponents have. But you still don't have your starting center in Travis Frederick, and you still have an undersized rookie left guard, and you're still in that difficult to play in environment because of the noise and everything. And when they struggle to run the football with the game still being determined, they never took any shots down the field, which is what got the Giants out of the box with the safeties last week. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Jerry looks at all of this, because he views everything through the prism ultimately of what's going to reflect the best on me as a general manager. Well, he hired the coach, called him his Tom Landry, so he's kind of in a squeeze there if he fires him. He's admitting he wasted 7 years with Jason Garrett, but he also drafted Dak Prescott and didn't, give Romo his position back when he was healthy, when that was an option, not one that many people other than Jerry wanted, quite honestly, to pursue. But how does he give up on Dak without, being criticized for the fact that they invested 3 years in this quarterback, and now it appears there are major questions about whether that's what he is? Or does he take option C and admit that he didn't build a very good team around him in the passing game because of what they have at wide receiver and tight end is below average by any standard in the NFL?
It is remarkable to watch and to see how this thing is already seemingly coming apart at the seams as the team falls to 1-2 now. And it is Ed Werder, obviously, of the Doomsday podcast, coming to us from our studio on the road in Tampa. We have studios all over the country. We think Westwood won. They've provided that to Ed. Ed, let's not pull back the curtain too much. You may be closer to kind of a hotel room situation, but you sound great. This is very much studio quality. Now, early in this ball game, in fact, it was Seattle's first drive. As the ball is delivered by Russell Wilson, the ball comes out of his arm and almost simultaneously, or out of his hand, and you see Tyrone Crawford, Cowboys defensive tackle, go in there and hit him. And we've seen this a million times in the league. That would be considered, we're talking about knockdowns, hits, hurries, all that kind of stuff. That fits. That's a good play. It's a good play, and then there's a penalty down there, and it's 15 yards for roughing the passer. And Ed, this is one of these cases where I think we would both agree the league is, their heart is in the right place in trying to preserve the most important players on the field and try to preserve with everything with concussions. I mean, again, the heart is in the right place with what they're trying to do to protect players, but this becomes so ridiculous that games, and this one I'm not saying completely turned on this play because the Cowboys were able to stop them eventually on that, but again, it was just a reminder of, I don't know how in the world you coach a defender now. I did see later in the game, the Cowboys linebacker came in there, and Jalen Smith, and actually hit the quarterback and sort of on his way down almost removed his body from it. I mean, it was kind of almost a dance-like move. I mean, you almost have to be incredibly athletic not to be called for roughing the passer. If they are going to call you for landing on, I get it if you load up and you are purposely trying to jam that
you
quarterback.
Lift and drive the player into the ground.
Correct.
Like Anthony Barr did last year to Aaron Rodgers and broke his collarbone. And that's why this rule was conceived. And it's ironic that it's the Packers who seem to be suffering most of all, because Clay Matthews was called for it for the third consecutive week. And this is not a guy who has a reputation. In fact, he has a pretty clean record in his career as far as not administering illegal hits. From 2009 to 2017, he's only had 4 roughing the passer penalties. Now he's had 3 already in 3 games. And, it's to the point where pass rushers have to beat the blocker, and then they have to be sure when they get to the quarterback not to hit him too high or too low, not to use the helmet, and then to be careful not to lift the quarterback or fall on top of him. And if you do all those things somehow, defying gravity and physics, then you've earned yourself a sack. But it's not all that easy to accomplish. And we talked about the Packers. You talked about the penalty on Tyrone Crawford. What about the one on the Seattle player who barely touched Dak Prescott? I'd never seen a 240-pound man go down so easily, and they called a personal foul on that.
But now what they're doing now is they're this rule, and again, we know why they did it. But it is causing almost a soccer-like reactions. We've seen how, the silliness of soccer players trying to sell injuries. We've seen it in the NBA. And in fact, the NBA had to bring about fines for players who were sort of openly flopping. And you saw it. That's exactly what happened with Dak. I mean, it's a little embarrassing since the game was pretty much already out of control at that point. But he took a little bit of obviously, when you slow that play down, the defensive lineman barely did anything to him. And Dak, it's what we've seen punters try to do for years, try to sell a roughing the punter or running into the punter penalty, and now quarterbacks are doing that. But that was just a completely silly play, and so they've gone so far. And I think what's troubling, Ed, is there are sometimes the league will almost try to change something in the middle of the season when they see it going so poorly. I don't know.
Well, I think we saw him do it with the helmet. Initiating any kind of contact with the helmet
in the preseason,
was called, in the first 2 preseason games twice as often as it was called during the rest of the preseason, and now it's barely been called at all during the regular season. So they obviously just tried to create awareness about what they were trying to accomplish, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have another one of those conference calls with the competition committee, a member of whom is Stephen Jones, who apparently told the Fox crew that the whole thing is out of hand with what they're calling. It was not the intent when it was passed, that we see some kind of modification of it in a way that allows the officials not to call all but the most egregious of these kinds of fouls.
All right, Ed, we are going to be joined by Glenn Stretch Smith, our former Cowboys scout and coach. He'll give the grades, and then 2 things, Ed, we haven't talked about that we're going to weigh in with him, and we'll throw our opinions in as well. But he has broken down those passing plays that appeared to be the fault of, at least if you kind of listen to Troy, and then, of course, just monitor it yourself. It looked like some safety issues the Cowboys have had. And by the way, Cowboys were worried about safety play heading into the season. It showed up today. And then, of course, Earl Thomas with the 2 interceptions makes it even more laughable. Ed, I want you to indulge me for just a moment while we'll get Stretch on the phone here in just a minute. But thank you, Hodges Capital. Ed's very familiar with the boys down in Uptown and what they have done with those equity funds. Ed, have you ever seen the show Billions? You ever watch that on Showtime?
I'm a big fan of the show Billions, yes.
I've been watching that. I mean, these guys sort of have the intellect, Clark and Craig Hodges, of a Bobby Axelrod, but they do it on the up and up. I don't think Chuck or Paul Giamatti's character, I don't think he's coming after them anytime soon, because for many, many years they've been taking care of folks, and I'm talking high wealth, and I'm also talking the kind of folks that are just trying to get their retirement in shape, and they're just doing an amazing job with their wealth management. It is Capital Hodges, or Hodges Capital, I should say, and Ed, if you ever want to go see them, I'll let you know where they are. They're right down there on Maple, and it's the old mayor's building, the old mayor's office in Dallas. It's one of the most gorgeous spots in all of downtown Dallas. Kind of a nice little secret back there, but I'll let you in on it. It is Hodges Capital, Clark and Craig Hodges. It was started by their father, Don Hodges, and it's an amazing thing, and they're amazing partners with us. And thanks again, by the way, we're making it public. We kind of did this last week, but Revolver, one of the great platforms out there. And Ed, you'll like this. Some of your former colleagues in the business, let's say, and we've all been colleagues with many people, especially me, who have had several different kind of jobs or several employers, are trying, as we speak, to come over to our platform. So there's a lot of excitement there. Okay, it is time to stop down and visit with Cowboys coach and scout, former coach and scout Glenn Stretch Smith.
I wonder, Mose, if anybody will even get a D.
Okay, we will see. But first, let me tell you about the lease lady. Of course, I'm talking about Marie, and it is autoleaselady.com. That's where you can find her, and that's where you can sign up. It's what I did, and boy, I'd been with another lease company for many, many years, and I tried out Marie at autoleaselady.com. It was an amazing experience, and Marie took unbelievable care of us, put my wife and child into my child's not quite ready to drive yet, but a Honda Pilot. Got 3 seats in there. I mean, this is big time, all their dance competitions, all those things you do. It's really been a great fit for our family, and Marie made it extremely easy. I was fortunate enough to grow up in Kaufman, Texas, knowing our local Ford dealers, and they're our greatest friends in town. And so I know what unbelievable service is like. And Marie, the Auto Lease Lady, is where to go. You can find her on Facebook, Auto Lease Lady, or go to autoleaselady.com. So proud that she's with us on the Doomsday podcast. And it is time for our weekly segment, That's a Stretch. Is that what we went with? Ed, is that fine?
I think so. I think
okay.
That's pretty good.
All right, good. I kind of stumbled there, but that's a stretch. I like it. I was going to do stretch plays, but that's okay. We do have Glenn Stretch Smith. He's preparing. He, of course, does Channel 8 WFAA. Local TV on Sunday evenings with Del Hansen, but Del's out trying to win some awards for Unplugged segments as we speak. So we have Stretch on with us. Stretch, let's start right off, and we'll get to the grades in a second. I know you want to sound off on some of the different aspects of this Cowboys performance, but these 2 touchdown throws that they had, Cowboys, the one part of their team that's been somewhat consistent is their play on defense, but that first touchdown, and that was to Jerron Brown, who ran just a sort of basic seam route. Wasn't a whole lot to it. Can you walk us through that? And as you were kind of seeing how that set up, it looked like Xavier Woods, who was just kind of coming back from injury, helping the Cowboys out at safety, got caught a little in between and arrived late on the scene. Walk us through, when you've kind of watched that thing a few times, what do you think happened there?
Well, it looked like, Seattle had game planned out a little bit. And I say that because when they got in the red zone, they were kind of getting into a hurry up look, and they thought, hey, we'll get some sort of middle of the field closed look, which they did. They got a 1 high safety. Now, Seattle lined up in a stack in what was essentially a double tight stack look, which the receivers are stacked over one another to each side. And then the inside guys took the seam, the guy that was stacked behind, they really just ran 4 vertical, and then they widened. And what it did was it put a stretch on Xavier. And I think you saw Russell Wilson look to the left and then spin the ball back to the right to a single high safety and a touchdown into the seam. So it looked like something that Seattle had game planned and did a nice job of game planning. And anytime you know what they're going to do coverage wise, obviously it looks good drawn up on paper. That's kind of the last guy that gets the chalk wins the mentality there. And they looked to me like the last one that got the chalk in that play.
Ed, did you feel like Earl Thomas, if he had been back there, would he have also been in no man's land, or would he just kind of come over there and pick that ball off?
Earl would have used his powers of patience. He would have deked the quarterback and made him think he was throwing one way or going one way, and he would have broke on the ball the other way and picked it off and probably gone 108 yards for a touchdown.
I think you're on point there. Now, Stretch, let's look at this other one. It's 7-3. Cowboys hanging tough. It's a battle of kind of a field position game at this point. Mayhair, whatever we say his name, Brett Mayhair comes in there and bangs in that field goal there. Cowboys feeling a little bit better about themselves, and then it strikes 52-yard pass to Lockett, the Rocket out of Kansas State. What did you make? Because that appeared to be another play where the safety made an error back there. But I know Troy on the broadcast seemed to think that when he went back into too deep, Kayvon Frazier didn't get enough depth. How did you read that one?
Well, and he's probably making an okay statement to say he didn't get enough depth to make the tackle. The problem is that I see is that the corner, Awuzie, has got to get a jam on that receiver. When you see a receiver free release and they're playing cover two, now the Cowboys were trying to disguise the coverage and their safeties were not level. They were again looking to show, hey, if we're not level, we're going to close the middle of the field, when in fact they stayed in two. And Frazier took a bad angle. He should have knocked him out of bounds after about a 35-yard throw. But the whole shot was there, and I'm saying the whole play could have been really that you could have disrupted the timing of the play if Awuzie had jammed the receiver. When you're playing cover two, you're a flat player, which means you got two high safeties and five underneath guys. So really all you have is from the bottom of the numbers to the boundary as a corner flat player in cover two, and he had no threat in there. So he should have gone ahead and jammed Lockett a little bit instead of really giving him a free release, and then the timing time's up. I mean, obviously Wilson can throw the ball and make the whole shot throw, and then he takes a bad angle. Frazier takes a bad angle that lets him score the touchdown. But I'm still going to put as much of that on the corner, especially in a cover two situation. You got to get your hands on that guy, and you got to try to disrupt the timing. That's right. And so then the question becomes, did they look to pick on him a little bit? I mean, was that something that they were going after? And that's obviously something you'd have to ask Schottenheimer and the staff in Seattle.
Yeah, they might have been peeking over there. The one thing I want to compliment Awuzie on that he's learned quickly, always if you're getting beat for a touchdown by anybody, whether it's his fault or not, always point kind of at somebody else. And I think that's important to make sure everybody realizes it's probably not your fault. Now, guys, I want to run through some of these grades. I think we ought to start where we started the show with. And Stretch, Ed and I have been pretty tough on the quarterback. This is a quarterback we've championed over the years, and he got great intangibles, but we might have to abandon him at some point. This is getting pretty ugly. They're not doing him any favors, obviously. But when you, and I know a lot of times you want to spend several hours with a film, we're going to put you on the spot. You've watched you watched the game like we all did. You've gone back and watched some of it on film. Just right away at first blush, how would you grade out this quarterback?
Well, I mean, he's got to make some more accurate throws. He's got to be more accurate with the football. I think that they've also got to get him into where he's comfortable. I'm saying Linehan has got to call some things outside the numbers. I mean, there are no throws outside the numbers. You got to throw the ball outside. I mean, we've criticized his, he's not a great deep ball thrower, but I mean, when your number one threat is little Colbuck Beasley, I mean, I think there's other things that I could point to initially, but he did not have a good game. He was pressured all game, and so I mean, there's no way I can give him a winning grade when you just initially look and see how. He missed some guys. He was not accurate with the football, and it's like he never got comfortable in the game.
Let me ask you something to follow up what you said there. You make a good point about their unwillingness to throw outside the numbers or down the field, which has the effect of really shrinking the field on the quarterback, right? And then you're going to emphasize the run on top of that. It makes it almost impossible to function as a quarterback in that situation.
Well, and I think that's exactly right. I mean, you make a great point. It turns into an arena league football field where you can't throw the ball. So, yeah, I think that their guys are looking at at the crossing routes, the shallow crossing routes, some of those things that obviously Beasley was able to do. But if you can't throw the ball outside the numbers, you can't win on go routes, and then obviously comebacks and some of those things that you can run outside the numbers that, really you run off of a go route. So if he's on top of a go route, hey, you're able to bring that thing back outside, whether you run it as a pivot out and you pivot out of that and come back down the stem, or you run it, as a straight comeback like they did back in the back in the day with Michael, where he was able to, keep those guys kind of play basketball and drive back down that stem outside. And when you can't do that, I think that really limits what you can do. So, you make a good point, Ed. That middle of the field is kind of their sweet spot, and people are figuring it out. And that's what they said, I believe, early in this football game. They said, you're not going to beat us. You're not going to beat us running the football, and then we're going to come up and play man coverage on your what I think are undersized receivers, and you're not throwing the ball outside the numbers. I'm going to play heavy inside leverage.
And you made the point that Dak doesn't throw down the field well. I think the reality is the statistical analysis would suggest that he doesn't do it very often, but that when he does it, he's actually quite successful on a reasonable percentage of the time.
And I agree. I also agree with that. I think that, they have got to upgrade the receivers. We spent a lot of time talking about, upgrading the safety position and obviously what they're going to do with Earl Thomas. And yeah, he'd be a heck of an addition, but I tell you what, they better address the fact that they don't have any receivers that are winning right now. There's several shots that I was pulling for the show tonight where, there's end zone shots where there is zero separation by four receivers. So I'm not real sure if you're being critical of the quarterback, where you tell him to go with the football when you don't have any receivers that can get open for you.
Well, I don't know if the general manager is going to be ready to admit that they failed in terms of accumulating wide receivers and tight ends for the quarterback. I'm not sure he's ready to go there. But I will say that, Mike Shanahan used to tell his receivers that if you can't beat one-on-one coverage, then you're going to have a nice career washing cars because they don't ever not cover you. That's as easy as it gets.
And that's exactly right. And the thing that I would say too is it's not as if, that the quarterback's having to guess what coverage he was going to get in the first half. He was getting cover one. We can get any simpleton off the street who can read a one high safety and know he's got man-to-man outside. And if those guys aren't winning for you, I'm just not sure, again, how we can be that critical of the quarterback when you see those kind of results or lack of results and lack of separation by the wideouts.
It is Glenn Stretch Smith, former Cowboys coach and scout, joining the Doomsday podcast. I will say that you gave the quarterback a D. It sounds like to me you gave the receivers a D, or maybe leaning toward F. Can't get any separation. Hey, they get a bunch of them, though. They got 4 tight ends on this roster. They've got 7 wide receivers now. Didn't get Bryce suited up. Let's look at running back. Stretch, how mad would you be as a coach if on a play like where Dak actually makes a nice little play with his feet and flips it out there to Zeke for what should have been perhaps a touchdown or would have been, how horrible a mistake is that? Or is that, hey, this is just something that happens? Zeke didn't have much awareness on that play.
Well, that kid's a football player. He's got great awareness, and my initial reaction would certainly have been the red ass. But once I saw and knew, hey, he was in the flat, he just kind of lost track of where he was. But 9 times out of 10, 99 times even out of 100, you've got to know where you are, and you got to know where that feel is. Once you get really outside those numbers, you got to know what the distance is between you and the boundary over there. And it really hurt the team because at the time that would have tied the football game. And with your quarterback struggling, with your receivers struggling, you needed your player to make a play for you. And unfortunately, he just kind of lost his compass right there and got stepped a little out of bounds. Yeah.
Let's give him like a C-, or maybe.
He also had a fumble later in the game.
And that's the thing, Matt. He turned the football over. He rushed for, he had some yards rushing, but I couldn't give him a C. I'd have to give him a D at best again for turning that football over. You can't turn the football and start kind of swinging it all over the place. He made a good move to cut back, but you can't put the ball on the ground there, and he'll tell you that.
All right, in that offensive line, I know you really liked the pick in the second round of Connor Williams out of Texas, and certainly it seems like when they get him on the move, he's got some good athleticism, but has had a little trouble anchoring and getting overpowered. And by the way, he wasn't the only one. As Troy pointed out, Zach Martin had some issues today. Tyron Smith over there on the left side, like Frank Clark got the best of him. Now, sometimes the quarterback needs to get rid of the ball. At first blush, what was your reaction to how the offensive line played?
Well, they've changed the technique as to how they're playing. This Paul Alexander, kind of Jim McNally, the guy in Cleveland, Bob Wiley. I mean, they all teach this technique of kind of carrying your hands low and then kind of catching and picking up. And so I think this offensive line is struggling with that technique. I think you can see Zach struggling. I really think you see Connor when he gets that bull rush, his hands are low. And I mean, to me, that's a technique I don't understand. I'm more of a sit and punch guy and be able to stop. You've got to be able to stop that bull rush, and you're able to stop that bull rush with your initial jolt and with your hands. I don't know enough about what Paul Alexander teaches. I know, again, it's a totally different technique. To me, it looks as if this offensive line is really struggling with that technique and how to pick that technique up. And so I can't give that group a winning grade for 5 sacks and the pressure that they allowed this afternoon versus Seattle.
Why do you go out and make an offensive line coaching change that forces your most important players to completely change a successful technique?
We all know the story. I mean, he felt like he was going to hire Mike Solari, who, by the way, is the Seattle coach, and he kind of drug his feet a little bit on Mike. He didn't hire him, and Mike, I think, left this interview here and went to Seattle and got offered the job, and he kind of the bird in the hand versus two in the bush mentality took that job, and so it's one of those things. It's kind of a musical chairs deal, and I don't want to pin that on anybody, but I'm not sure that I would have taken again a significantly different set of tools, skills, and changed an offensive line who I think is as talented as anybody, and to see them kind of regress a little bit, it's a painful watch.
I think you only know those types of stories if you listen to the Doomsday podcast. And as we continue with Glenn Stretch Smith, let's go over to the defensive side of the ball and start where we were talking about with some of those defensive backs. I thought Byron Jones did some good things, and certainly against Marshall, there was one ball that was just incredibly, I mean, where Wilson placed it, I'm not sure if any defensive back, unless they just turned around, could have made a better play on that ball. It was just a perfectly thrown ball, but for the most part, looked like Jones played pretty well. Obviously, the safety struggled at times. Wousier had his moments. What did you think overall, Stretch, on the with the secondary?
Well, I think the throw, Matt, you're talking about was on Wousier to the right side, if I'm not mistaken, where he threw that ball in there. But I thought that Byron Jones, and he made an incredible throw there, but I thought that Byron Jones did show some ability, and this is the first time that I thought he really flashed at me as a guy that's looking at the game and watching the film to say, hey, you know what? He got his hands on the football some. I have been critical of him because I felt like he was not a very instinctive player at safety. He didn't get his hand on the football, and there were times when he was, a half step late, but he does look more comfortable at corner. I did see today him as far as his footwork and his ability to use that boundary and kind of press that receiver in there and kind of use that as your 12th defender. That was something that was good to see as a Cowboy fan. And I think Wousier he gets better with every game. Yes, he's still, per se, he's still just almost barely over being a rookie, and he didn't get his full year to get his feet wet there. But I thought it hurt this team a little bit when Jeff Heath went down. They were playing some different looks where Heath was down, almost on the line of scrimmage, and they were going to say, you know what, we weren't going to let them. Seattle had come out and really tried to run the football, and they weren't going to let them run the football either. And so it was, they were matching up in man coverage outside. So I thought, secondary wise, other than the mental mistake on the 4 vertical, and then the bust that we talked about earlier with Frazier not taking a great angle, Wousier not getting his hands on him, I thought the secondary put in a good enough effort to really give you a winning grade on on the back end. So I do think that there are some upsides, and I do think that I'm starting to see, and I'm starting to come around to Byron Jones a little bit. I thought he was just going to be one of those guys who was going to be a combine freak and flame out, but he is starting to show me a little more of, what it really takes to be a football player.
And the Chris Carson was able to run for over 100 yards, and really the Seattle committed. They had a lot of balance to their offense. They committed to the run game. They had some success with it. Obviously, he didn't break off a ton of big runs, but he was effective. What did you think about the Cowboys' approach to slowing him down, and where was some of those breakdowns when he was able to get some yardage?
Yeah, I don't know that there was any real breakdowns. I think that the Cowboys defense seemed to tire. I mean, once they got out of that rotation where they were kind of putting Vander Esch in there a little bit, playing Sean Lee, trying to spell him, trying to get him through and kind of nurse that hamstring issue, I really thought they did a nice job pressuring the quarterback. I didn't like the call on Crawford. I understand when you let your entire body fall on the quarterback, they're going to call that right now. But other than really what was not a very smart, disciplined foul by Gregory, where it's always the guy that reacts that gets caught there. I mean, that's one of those things that obviously you can be very critical of. Giving up that 3 before the half was not smart. But I thought overall the front seven played well. I even saw some good things out of Vander Esch, and I've been very critical of that pick, but I did see him make some plays and kind of wrong shoulder a few things where he got up in there and was able to rip through and play his gap responsibility. I've been critical of Byron, and I've been critical of the pick of Vander Esch, but I can see what they see, and I can see where both those guys are starting to flash at you, and you feel pretty confident that this defense is much better than they were at the end of last year. Not only are they better schematically, but I think the personnel is somewhat better.
Well, Ed, do you have anything else? I thought Stretch gave us.
What were the grades then you give on the defensive line and the line?
I gave the linebackers a B, and I gave the defensive line a B also.
All right, and
I think the defense played. I think the defense played good enough to win the football game.
We might be, if they fired Jason during the season, we might be looking at Chris Richard as the interim head coach. But I don't think, as I explained to Ed earlier, my theory on this is Stretch about a game or two more like this where the offense just looks pitiful. And again, no new receivers other than Bryce Butler are walking through that door. So I don't think there's going to be just wholesale changes unless they just get really creative. I could see Jason taking over the play calling. Does that ring true to you at some point, just trying something different if it continues down this path?
Well, I think obviously that's a possibility. I think that, I'm not one of those guys that immediately gets out and criticizes the coaches because they're not making any plays. However, in this situation, obviously I like Tavon Austin, but I think you've got to get him on the move. I think you've got to motion him. You can't just line him up and expect him to go win for you. You got to motion him and move him around and let him do some things. But you've got to get in a situation where you can take some home run shots and get some of those guys loose. They have upgraded. The speed out there is better than it's been the past 2 years, but I'm not seeing again those throws outside the numbers. I haven't seen any real double moves. I haven't seen guys, be able to shake those smaller, guys free and get them up there where, you can take some shots instead of having to, 12 and 14 play drive people down the field. That's what won them the game. Last week is they hit that big shot, and you got to hit some home runs. And I think, Ed will attest to that. You got to hit. You can't just beat people to death by bunting and hitting CNI singles. You got to hit some home runs.
Yeah. Ask Jeff Bannister about that.
You got to get all that speed and bring it into the game. You got to make the speed work for you. You went out and got it. You made it a priority. You say it's been proved. Well, let's see it in the game. let it have an effect on the game. I don't think they've done a very good job of that.
Well, I couldn't disagree with that. So, and to answer your question, Matt, I could see this getting to where, Jason might take that play calling back over. I don't know how long he'll be patient with Lanahan. I know Lanahan does not like, 5 routes, which are comebacks. It's not something that he likes to do. He's kind of a deep over guy. He likes to run those deep overs. And when your offensive line is struggling, protecting, and when they've changed their technique and they're, having a hard time holding guys out, it's hard to get those guys across those, all the way across running those deep routes when you can't protect that long.
I think one of the things we didn't point out, Matt, is that, Dak got hit double-digit times today, throwing 39 passes.
Yeah, we're certainly going to talk more about that. Stretch, we appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. Watch Stretch every Sunday evening on that sports special with the moral compass of North Texas, Del Hansen. All right, there he goes. Oh, he just hung up on us. Glenn Stretch Smith. And as we wrap this thing up, Ed, there was a lot to unpack there. Some interesting thoughts he had on both those, the touchdown passes, and then we continue to talk about one thing you said, and I took a picture of this when Fox put it up there, how many knockdowns, how many hurries, how many hits there were on the quarterback. If you're an offensive coordinator, as he just pointed out, who likes these, let's get downfield, you just don't really have time for all that to happen right now. And, it's not really fair to sit there and go, well, maybe when's Frederick going to come back? Usually you might push a guy. You can't push a guy when he has some sort of illness like this, or I guess it's a disease. I mean, this is going to take some time. So this is a team. I keep coming back to this, Ed. It does not feel like help is on the way, and it's certainly not from the coaching staff.
Well, and he made us aware of a complication that we didn't know about when we spoke earlier, which is the offensive line, and it's a great point that this great offensive line that has been viewed by many to be the best in the league has undergone a coaching change of its own, and they're being taught a completely different technique. Why would you put yourself in that situation? And then if they can't provide protection, then how can any offensive coordinator run an offense when the offensive line can't, run block properly for Ezekiel Elliott or provide enough protection for Dak to scan the field and find an open receiver, of which it sounds like there aren't very many to choose from.
Yeah, no, you're right, and it is interesting.
It just sounds like offensively they have more problems than most people are aware of. I think most people think, it's a Garrett problem, or it's a Linehan problem, or it's a Dak problem, and really it's all of that and even more.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And, boy, good point. We did bring up the fact last week that the Cowboys maybe had their eye on Mike Solari from Seattle. But, boy, you're right. Stretch makes the point that if you're going to have, this is the best line in the NFL, and obviously we know it's compromised right now, but if that's basically the group you're working with, and you're going to go out and make a coaching change, and not only do you switch out with Cincinnati, but you switch an entire philosophy or a style of blocking, that is, and Stretch has tried to explain this to me. I'm not always the most coachable player, Ed. I know that doesn't shock you, but what he said is true. I think the point he makes is that, what they've done in the past is sort of that punch, they jolt them immediately. And in this blocking scheme, or what they're trying to coach now, is a completely different thing where it's like they kind of let the defender come to them. They don't take the fight to them. It's kind of like they bring them inside, and that's a very strange direction to go if we have decided that this team is built around one of the better offensive lines in the league. To make a wholesale change.
Pollock as the offensive line coach for whatever your rationale is, and I'm sure they felt like they had some measure of justification, then you make sure you have another guy lined up and has accepted the opportunity and is going to replace him. before you go and let him go somewhere else.
And the story goes that Solari, who they showed a shot of him late in the game, he's the offensive line coach for Seattle now after Tom Cable had been with them for several years. The story goes that he was inside the Cowboys building and kind of like almost free agency, Ed. Sometimes you got to get them while they're inside the building. Cowboys kind of let him move on and maybe had promised somebody else an interview. And when he went to Seattle, Seattle didn't let him go. And I don't want to act like Seattle's got the greatest offensive line ever. It's just they've had some injuries. They've got some issues themselves. But Solari,
but I think one of the things is when you're in their situation trying to recruit coaches, the perception is that hey, this could be Jason Garrett's last year, and I could get fired as part of that. I'm going to go someplace where there maybe is more security, and certainly. Seattle and Pete Carroll would seem to offer that on the surface.
It seems like it. And if a team is going to stick with a head coach during a rebuild or reload, whatever you want to call it, you would think Pete Carroll has earned the right to stick around with the level of success he has had. Jason Garrett has not earned that. We will continue to monitor this, Ed, as we dig into this thing, and we'll continue to share with our audience anything else you want to add tonight. I do want to thank everybody. Our Facebook page has really started to build a nice community there. And Ed, you've helped in that. You had a nice piece the other day you put up on our Facebook page. That's the Doomsday Podcast Facebook page. So join us on there. We'll periodically, in fact, I'm going to try to do this once a day, Ed. I'm not going to promise on your behalf, but really appreciate what you did the other day. We're going to jump on there, reach out to you during the week via the Facebook page, but we appreciate everybody who's been on there. Ed, anything else you want to add this evening as we see the Cowboys fall to 1-2 after a 24-13 loss to the Seattle Seahawks?
Well, this week they had interaction and conversations with the Seattle Seahawks, their opponent, about acquiring Earl Thomas, and so far that has failed. And next week, maybe when they play the Detroit Lions, they can get together with them and see if there's anything they can do to acquire the rights of Calvin Johnson and talk him out of his premature retirement and come play wide receiver.
I think you would get on that bandwagon a lot quicker than my Josh Gordon. And by the way, Josh Gordon tonight not active for the Patriots. We'll have to wait another week perhaps to see him in the lineup. But next week, Ed, I do want to give
classic Bill Belichick, humble a guy first. Right?
That's right.
Humble
That's right.
First.
Let's give all our listeners and subscribers some hope. Bryce Butler, it's likely you will see him active next week against Detroit. I mean, that right there, Ed, that's enough to get some folks excited.
I think they'll probably score 15 points next week. With Bryce Butler in the lineup.
They'll just rip it up. And Ed, you're always great on these numbers. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Haven't they done pretty much all of their damage, save for obviously in the
fourth quarter,
the Giants game they scored in the first half, but for the most part, 2 or 3 games they've really waited to do anything to find the end zone. Into the fourth quarter. So it's almost like the only thing tangible you can even hold on to for this offense sort of has happened in desperation. When in 2 of these 3 games, they have really sort of been out of it, and they're just sort of desperately trying to scrap their way back in. I mean, it seems kind of silly to call a team that when the opponent only had 16 points, or in this case today, 24 points, as being out of it. But with this offense right now, Ed, if you get down 2 scores, it feels like you're out of it.
I thought they were out of it when Seattle scored 7.
It kind of felt like that, didn't it?
But you know what I'm going to do, Jerry? A big favor tomorrow, and I'm going to have one more conversation with Jason Witten. He's covering Monday Night Football, as am I in Tampa. I'm going to see if I can talk him into coming back and replacing Blake Jarwin and Swaim and all those guys at the tight end position, just for a little while.
If anybody can
let Booger McFarland handle the broadcast.
Booger's fine, although Booger would have to go up to the deal. They've got him down there on the sideline for some strange reason, kind of riding around. But it's good stuff. And for people that don't kind of understand what Ed's talking about, he's in Tampa, Steelers, and the Tampa Bay, which has a juggernaut of an offense. I mean, this is a prolific team all of a sudden. Ed will be there in person to cover that thing.
He scored 75 points in 2 games, and the Cowboys have scored 41 points in 3 games.
Yeah, pretty pathetic, to say the least. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Ed Werder, at Ed Werder RFA. Always a fun follow, and Ed will tweet throughout the day. And I'm at Matt Mosley. And we appreciate Frito Nation for everything. And follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere you listen to your podcast. Subscribe, leave us a rating. We appreciate you. We love you. And everybody have a wonderful week. Ed, say goodnight.
Good night.
And there it is. Good night, everybody.
Shining, stockings have been hung. You're praying for your daughter, lighting candles for your son. They're living in the city now, you don't see them anymore. This year will not be like the ones before. And the streets are all but empty, the bars have all shut down, and it's hard to find a friend inside this godforsaken town. That emptiness, it feels from your head down to your toes. I'm sorry, baby, that's just the way it goes. Once you were a young girl with lovers by the score, money by the handful, you never wanted more. But men tend to leave you as time has its way, and they leave behind little mouths to feed and raise. And the days go by so slowly when it used to go so fast. Whiskey does not taste as good when you only pour one glass. There's just no way of knowing which way the cold wind blows. I'm sorry, baby, that's just the way it goes.
A lot can happen between falling in love with a house online and owning it, between imagining living there and breathing in your new home for the first time. Having an advocate who can help you navigate the complex world of financing, inspections, negotiating, analyzing the market, and talking through any anxieties that may pop up, that can make all the difference. That's what the expertise of a Realtor can do for you. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors and bound by a code of ethics, because that's who we are.
Norman, we need to pause this surgery.
What, doctor?
Because Xfinity Mobile just got even better. Now you're automatically connected to Wi-Fi speeds up to a gig while you're on the go. Plus, existing Xfinity customers can buy one unlimited line and get one free for a year.
Visit XfinityMobile.com to learn more. Offer ends 6/21. Restrictions apply. Existing Xfinity Internet service and 2 new unlimited lines required. Reduced speeds after 30 gigabytes of usage per line. Data thresholds may vary. Actual Wi-Fi speeds vary, not guaranteed.